Welcome back to our Missouri Open Door Technology series. Um, Today's topic is going to be Introduction to the Pathway to Technology Solutions. Our setup's going to be a little bit different today, but my name is Angelina Alpert. I am a research assistant at UMKC Institute for Human Development, and we're going to go ahead and just jump right in today. So, the current reality of services and supports is that there is a high demand for services, but there are not enough services to go around with federal and state budgets, workforce issues, current federal and state policies. And there are also expectations, values, cultures, and rights that have changed since a lot of these policies were first released. So our goal is to integrate services in support systems to help change that reality of the service system. So our goal is to um, have the services throughout a person's life. That way, the services aren't secluding a person from the family and community that they want to be a part of. And we do that through our integrated support star. So our idea with this session today is elevating technology as a solution. So we want to use these 5 types of services and supports in a person's life in order to diversify the funding that they are using so that it's not just eligibility specific um, services that are helping them in their daily life. So we have personal strengths and assets, which are the skills, strengths, and personal belongings that a person has. Relationships, whether that is family, friends, acquaintances, neighbors, anybody there to give somebody a hand. Eligibility specific are those needs-based services. So it's on age, geography, income level. Those are going to be your formal government paid services. We also have community-based, which are places such as businesses, parks, schools, group or membership organizations, things that anybody would have access to in the community. And then we have technology, which is what we are going to dive in today. So, we want to talk about the type of change that is needed when it comes to technology. So, we really want to focus on transformational change, which is changing the way that you think about a topic. So, for technology, we want to change the assumptions that are made about technology and the myths around technology is something that David is going to talk about today. Um, and with that, I will pass it over to David.
All right. Thank you very much, Angelina, and good afternoon, everybody. And I guess it's still January, so hope everybody's new year is off to a good, solid start. Yes, as Angelina said, we're going to talk a little about the pathways to technology, and I am going to kind of give some background here to begin with as to sort of what the thinking is behind pathways and what kind of led us down this road to start working on this project. So we're going to start by going back to the early 1990s. And down there in the bottom center of the screen, there's a newspaper article, a clipping from a newspaper article, and you will see that there is a woman who is using a keyboard and she is looking into a computer model. This woman is actually kind of one of my heroes in the world of assistive technology, and her name is Mary Pat Radabou, I'm sorry. And you'll see that she has a quote up there at the top, and the quote is that for people without disabilities, technology makes things easier. For people with for people with disabilities, technology makes things possible. So this was a statement that was in a manual that IBM put out in the early 1990s, and this has stuck with me ever since I came across it. And just quickly before I get back to the statement, in the bottom left-hand corner, that very grandmotherly looking woman is Mary Pat today. So again, kind of one of my role models, but I have always thought that this statement is super interesting for a couple of reasons. You know, there's technology all around us. We are using technology constantly, and it is absolutely instrumental to how we do our jobs and live our lives and all the things that we are able to achieve. And so many of them are directly tied to technology. And she's very true when she makes the statement that for those of us without disabilities, technology makes things easier. However, even more impactful is the idea that in this statement that she came up with in the early 1990s was the idea that for people with disabilities, technology makes things possible. So, what I've always thought about this statement is that it is highlighting the inherent potential of technology to enhance the lives of people with disabilities. The other thing that I think is super interesting about this statement is she's just referring to technology. She's not referring to the technology for people with disabilities as we commonly refer to it today, which is assistive technology. So as this has kind of rattled around in my mind for a lot of years, and as I've watched the world of assistive technology evolve, it's really got me thinking about how we think about technology for people with disabilities and where we are and where we've been and where we need to do better and new ways of building capacity, which is sort of behind the pathways to technology that we have been working on at Missouri Assistive Technology with folks down at the Institute for Human Development. So if we move to the next slide, um, I have often thought, you know, the phrase assistive technology, you know, those are two nouns, or actually it's an adjective and a noun. We usually kind of think of it as one word. And I really think that it should be reclassified in the dictionary as a verb. Because we often think about the devices, but we don't necessarily think about how those devices, the outcomes of those devices for people in across the lifespan and the positive things that happen as a result of using technology and having things happen if you're a person with a disability. So if we think about it as a action verb, then technology is super important for having a good life, as we see illustrated here by this gentleman in the picture. And if we move on to the next slide, technology is super important for enabling us to have self-determination. And as we see in this picture here of the gentleman in the wheelchair who is speaking up at a meeting somewhere along the way. And if we move on to the next slide, technology is super important. It's something we actively utilize to help us be able to participate, as we see with this picture where the young woman is using an augmentative communication device as she's sitting in an audience at a presentation. Moving on to the next slide. Technology opens doors for people with disabilities to be able to take full advantage of educational opportunities. And we see that illustrated here in this picture where this young woman, who I assume has a vision impairment, is using an electronic enlarger, and it's enabling her to see the teacher. And you will see she's actively able to do the assignment along with the teacher through the use of technology. She may not have been able to do that. That may not have been possible for her if it wasn't for that technology making that possible. And then if we move on to the next slide, technology enables folks with disabilities to achieve employment, to maintain employment, to commute, to participate in the workforce, which is a goal that so many folks with disabilities have. And then finally, at the end of the lifespan, technology is equally important because it helps us age gracefully in place. It helps us maintain our self-dignity. It helps us be able to live independently as far into the future as we can. And so these are just all examples of, you know, technology is not just the devices. It is a series of actions that are opened up as things are made possible for folks with disabilities. So if we move on to the next slide, Let's fast forward about 30 years here to the early 2020s, and a book came out by a woman by the name of Sarah Hendren. And I imagine there are a few folks in the audience that have heard me express my the earth-shattering impact that this book had on me, and have probably heard me recommend it a lot of times. But the name of the book is called "What Can a Body Do? How We Meet the Built World" by Sarah Hendren. And what I thought was among the many things that I thought were super interesting in Sarah's book is that she uses the phrase all technology is assistive technology. So here, 30 years later, she's echoing what Mary Pat said in the early 1990s, where Mary Pat didn't use this term assistive technology, she just referred to technology. And if you really think about how technology has evolved and all the great things that are out there and all the built-in accessibility features we're seeing in mainstream technology, or the ways mainstream technology in and of itself can enable things to happen for folks with disabilities, we begin to realize how true this statement is. Technology for people with disabilities, those pieces of technology that makes things possible, they are in the eyes of the beholder. I can look at a device and not see the accessibility features, whereas somebody with a disability can, and they see the potential behind that piece of technology to be able to make something possible in their lives. So the other thing that I think is noteworthy about Ms. Hendren's book is there's this interesting little footnote down there that is kind of stuck in my head ever since I read it, in which she asks the question, when we put assistive in front of technology, if all technology is assistive technology, when we put the adjective assistive in front of technology, aren't we by default stigmatizing that technology? We're essentially saying that this is technology that's different. It's separate from mainstream technology. It's its own world, when we know that that is not the case, because all technology can be assistive technology. And I really have often thought that little footnote is a very true statement, because we default to thinking that only certain devices that have assistive in front of them or are labeled assistive are going to be the ones that folks with disabilities are going to use. All right. So I'm a big believer in trying to build capacity, if we move on to the next slide, and make sure that we all are kind of singing from the same hymnal. So we're going to do a quick little definition, or do a quick little review of some of the basic pieces, the basic building blocks in this world of technology for people with disabilities. There has been a definition of assistive technology or technology for folks with disabilities that has been out there for a long time, and it is sort of the standard definition. And that is that assistive technology is any item, piece of equipment, or product system, whether it's acquired commercially off the shelf, modified, or customized, that is used to increase, maintain, or improve functional capabilities. So one of the things that I have noted about this statement ever since it came out again in the early 1990s, about the same time Mary Pat was busy at IBM, is that pretty much any form of technology you can think of is covered by these terms. So when they say any item, piece of equipment, or product system, no matter where you purchase it, and as long as that technology is used to increase, maintain, or improve functional capabilities. So again, that idea of does that piece of technology provide potential to enable somebody with a disability to be able to achieve something? And if you look a little harder at this statement, you also begin to realize that this also mirrors what Sarah Hendren said in her book about how all technology is essentially assistive technology. So this is our standard definition, been around for about 3 decades now. It's really broad in terms of what can fit, what could be defined as assistive technology. So if we move on to the next slide, I think we all inherently know this idea or this general concept, but maybe sometimes we don't practice it in terms of when we're thinking about technology for folks with disabilities. Assistive technology, that idea, or technology for people with disabilities, is really an umbrella term. There are the devices, but those devices are not going to work unless, or we're not going to be able to match somebody up effectively with the appropriate device unless we pay attention to the services. So, like a parallel here would be, or an analogy would be that, a car is just a car until you put gas in it. So, the car is the device and the gas is a service. And collectively, you get a movable operable vehicle. That perhaps is not one of my better analogies in life. Anyway, long story short, I always think of assistive technology as this umbrella term. I have this image in my head when I talk about it a lot, that the devices are one part of it, but the services are equally, if not slightly more important. So services can be things like assessing a person for an appropriate device, matching up a device with the features that are going to be most useful to that individual, training the individual on being able to use the device, training family members, finding funding sources, doing a device trial, just all those sort of actions that are part and parcel of making sure that the right piece of equipment is provided to somebody and the right supports are in place to be able to have them be able to maximize that potential and go forth and achieve what it is that they need to achieve. So moving on to the next slide. Sometimes we get this interesting question here at Missouri Assistive Technology about who benefits from this so-called assistive technology or this technology for folks with disabilities. And if we start with the middle bullet point there, disability statistics are kind of all over the place. There are a lot of different entities that measure them, but generally somewhere between 13 and 26% of the US population identifies or has been categorized as having a disability. So that's literally millions upon millions of Americans who haven't identified or self-identify as having a disability. But technology that can make something potentially happen for a person could include, I may not identify as having a disability, but I may have difficulty with speaking or typing or writing or remembering or pointing or seeing or hearing or learning or walking or many, many other things. And I still could be somebody who's going to benefit from technology. And at the end of the day, if you really stop and think about it, all of us, the top bullet point, use assistive technology. There are so many things that were developed originally for folks with disabilities that are now mainstream technology, such as voice input or texting or word prediction. So in reality, there's a lot of different ways we could cut who uses assistive technology, but really at the end of the day, it's all of us. We will, at some point in our lifespan, if we aren't already, need some kind of technology that helps make something possible for us. And so that's who benefits from technology. Moving on to the next slide. We often talk about there's a continuum in the world of technology for folks with disabilities. And it's not all just under one big lump of high-tech devices or expensive devices, and we don't want to just gravitate towards those. We need to understand this continuum, and it's part and parcel of some of the stuff we teach through Pathways to help us match up a person appropriately. We don't have to start with the device that has all the bells and whistles. Sometimes we just need to make some simple accommodations in that person's life to be able to help them achieve something. But if we start exploring technology with them, we want to start at that low tech end. Start identifying devices that have features that are simple. They're low cost. They don't require a lot of a power source or have computer chip in them or anything like that. If we don't find anything there, then we move up to the mid-tech level, which are those slightly more advanced devices, often battery operated, perhaps require some more skill or training to help the individual be able to use it. And then last, as we're kind of walking through the continuum, as we think about options for an individual we're working with, are those high-tech devices, which are the most complex. They're usually the most costly. They're generally computer-based, have lots of features, lots of bells and whistles, and more often than not seem to require a fair amount of training to understand the device to help a user be able to use that device. So we don't have to make this more complex than it needs to be. We're trying to find features and pieces of technology that somebody can grasp, somebody can master, that somebody has success with. And so if we begin by thinking about solutions that might be on that low tech, under the low tech banner, and working our way through the whole continuum, if need be, then that's where we're going to identify the most appropriate device for an individual. We also talk a lot, if we move on to the next slide, about this idea of types of technology or categories. And I sometimes shudder a little bit when we have this discussion because categories of assistive technology are really there as a nomenclature, as a way of organizing the literally thousands of devices that are out there. But the categories that you will hear people talk about in the world of technology for folks with disabilities are not destiny. So that, let's use an example here of something that might be put under the sensory aid category that might have a name like the hearing helper. And we think but based on the name or the category that it's slotted into, that's just going to be a device that can only assist an individual who has a hearing impairment. But we know through practice and through research and through just practical knowledge that a lot of times devices might be in a category, but they have applications across multiple disabilities. So the point in here is we use this to make life easier, to help us be able to categorize the things that are out there, but categories are not destiny. We're looking for things that have features that are going to be most in line with what an individual needs to have something happen for them. Let's moving on. We're going to kind of change gears here and talk about some of the current issues in technology. And honestly, I think this would be a great time. I just threw a few things on this slide, but if other people have what they think are some current issues in technology, throw them in the chat because we are trying to kind of collect some of these things we've observed and read about and people have shared with us over the years that are behind some of our thinking as we've been working on this pathway. So some of the current issues in the world of technology for folks with disabilities. The first one is that there's a gap. There's a gap between the need for technology and access to it. As more and more people benefit from using technology to make something possible for themselves, we need to, we need to be paying attention to all these folks and have more and more resources and have more and more discussion with them so that we can close that gap between those people that could benefit or because they've said so or because maybe we've suspected that they can benefit from technology and their ability to access it. And obviously, that's one of the things we try to do here at Missouri Assistive Technology and our fellow Tech Act programs around the United States is provide, these abilities to access devices or to services, et cetera, et cetera. But we have so many people that, they still are kind of on the wrong side of this equation and we need to connect them with resources and help them access technology so they can see the inherent potential. We always need more trained personnel. And that kind of ties in with the fourth bullet point there, that there's an over-reliance on the expert model. We all need to know something about technology. We all probably need to be trained in some level or another about the array of devices, understand concepts like how to assess somebody, how to maybe match somebody up with the appropriate features. We will never have enough experts. And experts are wonderful. I learn a lot from experts, but we all, we kind of need to have the water level rise so all boats rise so we can all kind of have a common discussion and have a certain set of tools in our toolbox so that we can have discussions with those folks that we come in contact with that can benefit from technology. It's often said there's a lack of awareness at all levels. And I don't mean that there's not a lack of awareness in terms of technology. I think a lot of us realize all the benefits of technology. However, there's a lack of awareness, perhaps maybe on resources or how to think about technology or how to consider it or how to train somebody on it. And so these are also things where we kind of need to raise all boats and increase knowledge in the breadth and depth of people that have this information in their heads. I've kind of talked about the over reliance on the expert model, and then these next two bullet points, we the way that the world of technology for folks with disabilities has evolved over the years has been in kind of a piecemeal way. I think really we could make the argument that we really started focusing in on it initially when IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, was passed, and they put assistive technology in it in, I believe, 1994. And then we've added it to some other things. We've, expanded programs or added assistive technology to programs. And so we have this patchwork. But what we know is that all of us at some point or another will probably need some kind of technology because just the aging process alone causes us to develop disabilities or encounter barriers. And so we need to think about the policy and legislation, and kind of change that and change our thinking, not to attaching it just to a particular situation, or and think about it more as this is part of the lifespan, and so it needs to be driven kind of with this whole person approach, less than it is by legislation and policy that are just kind of randomly done every now and then, et cetera, et cetera. The other thing that's sort of problematic from a legislative or policy perspective, that I would think a lot of folks maybe who are attending today have encountered is there are these odd things that happen where we essentially are yanking the rug out from an individual when it comes to technology. At certain points in the lifespan, there are lots of resources. There are ways to fund devices. Devices are, required to be explored with students that have IEPs in our schools. But when those students that have IEPs and have assistive technology and have been using it successfully end up graduating from school, those devices don't transfer with them more often than not. And so we've kind of just put them behind when it comes to looking for moving into the community, going to college, looking for employment, et cetera, et cetera. And this is one of several examples out there with just the way legislation and policy has been drawn up and rules and regulations have been put in place that we can have great success one day and then we take that option, that success away from somebody and have to start the whole process over again. Other issues in technology, it is changing rapidly. We all know this. Now we're starting to see how AI is affecting this world of technology for folks with disabilities. And so, finding ways of sharing information and staying on top of it is definitely always an issue. And then I'd already touched on earlier when I was talking about Sarah Hendren's book that we sort of stigmatize technology for people with disabilities by using this term assistive, somehow making it seem like this isn't just technology, that this is some kind of other, something outside of the mainstream. All right, so pause there. Angelina, if you want to move to the next slide. These are some myths about technology that I think are interesting, and they have been around for a long time. Sometimes folks with disabilities hold these myths. Sometimes it's professionals, sometimes it's family members, but they persist out there. And something that happened early in 2024 that I thought was very interesting was the Federal Department of Education put out a facts and myths about assistive technology manual and distributed it widely. And what caught my attention about that was that the myths that they were talking about in that document are the same ones that we were hearing 20 and 30 years ago. And it's time that we move beyond these myths, that we realize these aren't facts, they're outdated opinions. So the first one is, and I've kind of touched on this a little bit, that technology for people with disabilities is always going to be expensive. It's always going to be high tech. And yes, there are examples of expensive devices and there are examples of high tech. But if we go back to that continuum and we think through, starting at the low tech options and then, kind of working our way through looking for those features, we'll start to realize that most pieces of technology that are going to be effective for somebody are low cost. And as we see more and more accessibility features built into our smartphones and our tablets, we also realize that a lot of times we have that technology right there under our nose. We just have to know it's there. And that doesn't cost us anything more than the cost of that smartphone or that tablet. So it's not always going to be expensive. It's not always going to be high tech. There are thousands upon thousands of low tech, inexpensive, sometimes free options that we need to be aware of and help break this idea that it's always going to be expensive or high tech. There's another myth is that assistive technology or technology for folks with disabilities is only for individuals who have certain types of disabilities. And sort of the default thinking on this sometimes that we see is for those folks that have visual disabilities. So maybe somebody who uses a wheelchair or somebody who uses a cane due to a vision loss. Anybody with any type of disability can benefit from technology. And it's not just folks that have visible disabilities. We're seeing so many great things come out for struggling readers and writers. We're starting to see some interesting things come out for folks that have various types of mental health issues. The list goes on and on and on. So, if it's a barrier, if it's preventing somebody from being able to be their best, and there's probably going to be some technology that can help kind of overcome that barrier, open potential for that individual to succeed. Sometimes people believe there's prerequisites around technology, that somebody has to be able to do A, B, and C before technology can be introduced or explored with that. You meet people with where they're at. And so there are no prerequisites to using assistive technology or technology for folks with disabilities. If there's a barrier, there's probably going to be technology. And so what are their skills? Where are they using that technology? Who are they? Try to find the device that meets them with where they are on the path. And one size fits all is sometimes what we see going on, where if it worked for Johnny, it's going to work for Jane. Everybody's individual. We always need to be thinking about and practicing best practices where we are looking at the person and not just looking at the technology and say, hey, this worked for this person, this is going to work for this person. What does each individual need? What are their strengths and their abilities? And how do we match up the most appropriate device to those strengths and abilities? This isn't so much a myth as kind of one of these practices we see out there somewhere. And because we've gotten, and this is kind of behind why we need to build everybody's capacity around understanding and practicing best practices in this world, and that is because we sort of sometimes maybe pass the buck a little bit. We're like, oh well, I'm responsible for A, B, and C, and oh my gosh, we'll just go find somebody who can take care of the technology part. But if we can raise everybody's boat, and again, we won't have enough experts, but if we can raise everybody's capacity, then hopefully we'll stop trying to, kind of pass the buck here and say it's somebody else's responsibility to match this individual up with the right piece of technology. I'll try another analogy here. I kind of failed on the first one, but this is the idea of, well, would you not buy a car? Would you have just told somebody else to go out and buy that car for you? Kind of the same thing here. You kind of don't, everybody needs to be part of this process. All right, I don't think I did any better with that second analogy. All right, so the last myth that's out there is that only individuals who specialize in technology can consider, assess, and explore. So we've, as I previously said, we need to, experts are out there. Experts are great. We'll never have enough experts. And there are no rules or regulations that I'm aware of that says we can't teach people how to use technology, that we can't discuss technology with individuals. And so we need to realize that all of us have the ability to explore and talk through options and put some of the services in place and match people up with the features that are appropriate for them. And it's not just people who specialize in technology. So if we move on to the next slide. This is kind of a transition here. So, these are, I kind of talked about, some of the things we see out there. And so kind of, the different perspectives and the different things we kind of trip over as we all realize how much more this stuff can benefit folks we work with. And so if we kind of stay in some of those myths or those situations that have happened over and over for the last 20 or 30 years, we're not going to get where we need to be. We're not going to have as many people using technology. We're not going to embrace it as part of the lifespan. So the only way we're going to do that is if we just zoom out, if we pull back and we rethink to the best of our ability, what's the journey? How have things been structured? What are the patterns? What context do we need to look at this for to find new solutions to how we match individuals up and discuss technology with them to enable them to have the best life possible? I literally have no idea who Whitney Wolfe Herd is. I've actually tried to research Whitney Wolfe Herd a couple of times, but Whitney's credited with this quote, and I thought it worked for this slide. So if somebody can look up Whitney Wolfe and share that with me at some point, I'd be appreciative. I've really tried a couple of times on this one. Moving on to the next slide, we will start talking about the pathway to technology solutions. And so what it is it's a framework and it's tools to help people be able to plan and organize around technology. So that could be an individual who identifies as having a disability, it could be a PCA, it could be direct care staff, it could be somebody who works in an organization, it could be a family member, it could be an educator. The list is endless as to the people that we are hoping will participate in the pathways and understand and get educated on the framework and the tools so that all of us have the ability to have this conversation with the folks that we come in contact with. So the whole thing is designed to build capacity to help us understand, consider, explore, access, and implement technology, the devices, as well as those equally as important related services. And there's really nothing new, bullet point there, about the stuff that the materials that we are building the pathway out of. They're just sort of an accumulation, a condensation of all those best practices that are out there, and we've kind of utilized those to create this framework and tools. And so again, and I've said this a couple of times, the whole idea comes out of we need to rethink how we talk about it, and all the folks that we now need to make sure are at the table and having this discussion because we have to see that this is now part of the lifespan. These aren't one-off situations. These aren't hither and yon once in a while. We will all need this. It's part of the lifespan. It's something that we're going to encounter and need in our lives. And so just that last bullet point, so it's a framework and it's tools and it's a template that can be then taken and incorporated no matter what you do or who you are into your day-to-day planning and your service delivery models. We hope that it'll also be something that agencies will start to work in and make it part of sort of their culture as well. All right, let's move on to the next slide. So our goals with the pathways to technology are to elevate everybody's thinking, to get more people under the tent of knowledge about technology. So to shift our thinking, to accept the idea that all technology is assistive, to accept the fact that it's used across the lifespan, and we should see it that way. As I've alluded to a couple of times, one of the goals is to have more people be part of this discussion about technology, and in particular, the people that use it and or their family members. They have lots to contribute. We need to make sure those voices are heard and help guide us as we work with them. And then the overall goal is just to build technology capacity from border to border throughout the state of Missouri to make this whole discussion easier and smoother, and sort of maybe even begin to change policy and practice in the legislative and policy arena. All right, let's move to the next slide here. So the outcomes are, education and training, building skills, helping folks grow professionally. We also, some of the outcomes, we really hope to be able to get people to collaborate and network together and realize sort of this network of how all these things tie together, and the folks that need to be at the table, and all the information that's really out there. But since we don't always network and collaborate when we're discussing technology with somebody, the more of that we do, the more we grow, the more we learn, the more effectively we can work with individuals. And then ultimately, it's time to maybe have some discussions, especially as we grow our knowledge and our capacity, around how can we shift advocacy efforts? How can we shift and improve policy within agencies, legislatively, around this whole issue of assistive technology, so it's raised to a higher, more proactive view and not just a reactive situation. All right. So this is Angelina, you want to take this one? You did the great artwork, so I'll let you show off.
All right. So this high level is the planning pathway to technology solution. So these are the steps that you'll be going through when planning for technology. So you're starting with exploring a person's visions, needs, and environment. As David has already said, we want to move away from focusing on a limitation that a person has, and instead focus on the task that it is that they're having difficulty doing, and making sure that that person is involved in the planning process. It is for them. So making sure that they're involved in the planning process is just as important as finding the solution for it. Next would be generating technology solutions. So coming up with possible devices that would be a solution to the task at hand. Then selecting one of those devices to try. Using the technology. It's not always going to be a first try. You're going to find what works for you. So you want to make sure you give it a chance when using the technology. And then if it turns out that it's not something that works for what you needed it for, refining that technology solution. So going back through this planning phases again. And making sure that we're finding something that truly fits the person and the task it is that they are trying to accomplish, rather than trying to force that one size fits all model, and assuming that just because it worked for somebody else with the same task, that it's going to work for this person as well. So with that, kind of bringing everything together, felt the easiest way to do this was going through a trajectory. So anybody that's unfamiliar with the trajectory, um, the goal of it really is to plan out a vision of what you want and what you don't want. And that could be for anything. You could do a vision of what you want and what you don't want for the technology device that you're looking for, or vision for what you want or don't want for where you're living. So this is kind of an overall what we want, what we don't want for technology as a whole. So for what we want people to feel more comfortable suggesting and using technology. We want to destigmatize assistive technology, making sure that, people with disabilities don't feel like there is something wrong with using a piece of technology. If it helps, everybody uses it. Um, people to have more independence, and for people to live where they choose. If, staff is not available, to help somebody live more independently, then we want to find devices that help that person live independently, so that they can live in a place that they choose. Um, on that other side of the line here is going to be things that are going to help us accomplish that vision of what we want. So for this, the Pathway to Technology Solutions hopefully will lead us towards that of, breaking that model of an expert model, and helping people feel more comfortable with using technology. Also, Tech Act programs such as demo sites, device loans, financial loans. Missouri Assistive Technology is the Tech Act program for the state of Missouri. But if anybody is on from another state, or works with people out of the state, there are tech programs in every state that has programs such as that. And then having technology that helps with tasks that are difficult to complete. For what we don't want to use a one-size-fits-all recommendation. We don't want to focus on the limitations of a person, and we don't want people to think that technology is always expensive and complicated to use. So the things that would lead towards what we don't want would be not transforming the way we think about technology, letting technology continue to be driven by legislation and policy rather than the individual, as well as how we define technology. So I will pass it back over to David, to talk about what's next.
All right. Thank you. I had to give my voice a little break there. Okay, so I was kind of flipping through the chat messages, and there was one early on when I was talking about Mary Pat, and she was sitting at that computer. This is the early 1990s, and somebody had mentioned the fact that, and this is true, that that computer was using a floppy disk. So for those of you that remember floppy disks, just have a moment to the 90s. And so I thought that was pretty funny when I saw that in there. And then thank you, Pat, for finding the Wikipedia entry for Whitney Wolfe Herd. I can check that off my to-do list. I will be checking out who this person is since I've been using their quote. All right, so what's next? Throughout this upcoming year, we will be launching this, and what we hope, on the left-hand side there, you will see a map of the state of Missouri with all the counties there. We would ultimately like to see if we can establish sort of these regional networks of what we refer to as AT Academy ambassadors, where folks in a region maybe are meeting on a fairly regular basis to build their skills through maybe sharing information or talking about individuals and brainstorming around solutions, learning about resources such as funding or training opportunities that they've utilized, just sort of getting people to get to know one another and network and collaborate and on a regional basis. And so that's where one of the things we definitely want to start to figure out how we can build that network out. But we also we've got this 1 hour session of the AT Academy, which we've given a couple of times and are always glad to provide again if anybody's interested in it as a session. But we also are working on taking this 1 hour session and expanding it out to a 3 hour session, where we're going to dive in more deeply into this whole idea of the planning pathway, learn some more about methodologies, best practices in assistive technology, and dig in deeper on all those related things. And then we're also working on a day-and-a-half version of this, more sort of a greater training, a little bit of a we call it the AT Academy certification. We hope we have a lot of folks that'll go through this day-and-a-half as time goes on. But it's taking the 1 hour and the 3 hour and stretching out even more to dig even deeper into best practices and methodology and tools, and just really kind of do a deep overview of the framework and get this knowledge into people's heads. I often say that the world of technology for folks with disabilities isn't rocket science. It's like kind of maybe 10% knowing the devices, 90% creativity. And so by you getting these ideas in heads around devices and methodologies and best practices, the folks that go through the day and a half will then be in a good position to be able to implement this and use it with the folks they work, but also maybe make some changes within your related organizations so that we're placing a greater emphasis on making sure that all folks who can benefit from technology to make something possible are aware of it, have access to it, have explored it, and ideally have obtained it.
All right, so here is our Missouri Open Door series for the year. We have oh, I'm now realizing that I had the titles switched. My bad. Um, what you see on your left-hand side there, with all of the dates and topics and registration links is our technology series, which is typically the fourth Wednesday of every month from 12:30 to 1:30. Um, February 26th will be our next one. It's going to be Make More, Buy Less, kind of that DIY technology kind of vibes for that one. March 26th will be ABCs and 1, 2, 3s of AAC. So when you get the slide decks, you'll be able to register for all of these in advance if you would like, rather than waiting for them to come out month by month. November will be the only one that we switch the date of, kind of keep that away from the holiday at the end of the month there. And then we also won't be having a tech series in April. April 29th through May 1st, is the Charting the Life course showcase this year, which I will drop the registration link in the chat once I go through these. And then the benefit series talks about those formal government benefits. Um, and those are the second Wednesday of every month from 12:30 to 1:30. February 12th is the next one on that. And it's going to be family navigation. So Missouri Family to Family, which is run through UMKC-IHD, will be talking about their services, and then Special Healthcare Needs Family Partnership from Department of Health and Senior Services will be talking about theirs as well. And then if anybody has any questions, feel free to either put them in the chat, or raise your hand and I can unmute you. But I will toss up David and I's contact information for now. David, any closing remarks?
Uh, it's, I think my closing remarks would be kind of one of the mantras that went over and over again, and that is that we all sort of have an obligation to be able to have this discussion and understand this because this is uh, technology has been so valuable for so many people, even more so for a lot of people with disabilities. We've got great things going on in the state of Missouri. Let's capitalize on them. Let's bring everybody into the knowledge realm so that we can just keep expanding opportunities for folks with disabilities to be able to do things, and technology is key to their oftentimes being able to do things.
All right, well, with that, I am dropping in links for the registration for February, as well as more information on the showcase. We're going to be doing some more with technology at the showcase this year, which we're really excited about. And if anybody's familiar with Dan Habib and his son Sam Habib, they are going to be doing a viewing and a discussion of their new film, The Ride Ahead, which is Sam's experience with disabilities and having those uncomfortable conversations that people don't typically want to have with people with disabilities. So we're really excited to get to show everybody that, and and have them there to have a conversation about that. Diana, were you trying to say something? Did you want me to unmute you?
Well, I've known David for quite a long time, and he's helped me with assistive technology. Yeah. Pre-gray hairs, huh, David?
Yeah.
But I'm for people in their 60s, assistive technology devices, um, as we get older, they're becoming more readily available, but not easy to get. And that's a dilemma that a lot of caseworkers are having, unfortunately. Um, so probably a lot of caseworkers are out there, FYI. And for the people with disabilities, hitting up the caseworkers and saying, we heard this device is available for tremors or for seizures or bed devices and things like that. Get a hold of David, you know. Um, so uh, just be patient if you're out there. It will work, um, but it takes a little bit of time, takes a little bit of paperwork, uh, but it does work.
It does. Yeah, and the more we know, the more we can quantify what we know, the more we can advocate for more opportunities for people to be able to obtain devices. So all these things go hand in hand.
And I need to talk to you later, David.
Okay.
All right. Well, with that, recording and slides will be sent out as usual. I know that some people had some issues getting in from the waiting room this morning. So if you missed the beginning part, recording will be posted to YouTube, as well as sent out to the email. Um, and we look forward to seeing you next month. Thank you everyone for joining us. Have a good one.
Bye bye.